5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
You're listening to the GHT Overland podcast. Welcome. Thank you for joining us on the GHT Overland podcast.
You know how we thought about, well, many variations throughout the last year or so, but possibly having an RV or something larger and more comfortable and then tow our Jeep behind it?
Yes, we have a lot of different options we've been throwing around.
True facts. Well, guess who we get to talk to this week?
Oh my gosh. Oh, somebody that's got a larger comfy vehicle and tows their Jeep.
Boom! There you go. You nailed it.
I nailed it.
But you weren't there.
I know. I was bummed. Sorry, I missed it.
We missed you quite a bit.
Yes,
it was heartbreaking. I'm sure our listeners missed you greatly.
I hope so.
Of course I did.
I enjoy doing this.
Yeah. And for those of you who travel with kids or are thinking about, wondering, traveling with kids, our new guests this week have some great tips to share. And a quick note, they will be teaching a class at Overland Expo West in Flagstaff, Arizona here in a few short weeks. And they'll also be a part of a couple different panels. So we'll cover that in more details at the end of the episode. So stay tuned for that. And I say we get into it.
Yeah, let's roll.
Let's do it. Thank you for joining us on the GHT Overland podcast. This is where you get the greatest interviews and insights from overland travelers around the globe, learning from their stories and experiences as we interview overlanders from places like Australia, Africa, the Americas, Portugal, and today, the great state of Texas. You will learn the basics to the advanced in overlanding, so buckle up and get ready for a new adventure. I am a sadly solo Chris without Lisa today. However, very stoked to have today's featured guest on the podcast. Eric and Brittany Highland are in their 6th year of full-time travel. They own no house, no land, and travel in a Jeep and an RV full-time with their toddler, Caspian. Caspian, also known as #Little Nomad, has been a full-time traveler since birth. In the last 2 years, they visited 33 national parks and just returned from the interior of Mexico. Eric and Brittany have a significant amount of practical knowledge and experience to share. We are humbled to have them join us to learn from their experiences and stories of overland travel. So, without further ado, welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Sorry we're missing Lisa today, but it's great to be here, and thanks for hosting us.
Awesome. We're glad to have you. And she was sad that she couldn't be here, but I think we'll make it through.
All right.
Let's do it.
So fill us in on any blanks that I may have missed in your intro and tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, I mean, we are full-time travelers. Like you said, we're on our 6th year. And so in 2014, at the beginning of the year, we sold everything. Yep. And we moved into a 40-foot RV. And along the way, picked up our Jeep Wrangler. And we've been traveling all over the continental United States. But we found that wanderlust never goes away. And those who have wanderlust always want to push the boundaries and find new ways to satisfy that craving to see more of the world. And that is how we got into overlanding.
Now, Eric, you also served 20 years active duty in the United States Coast Guard, some of the finest men and women that I've interacted with. So thank you for your service. It's an honor to have you on the show today.
Appreciate that, Chris. Shout out to all my fellow men and women in the United States Coast Guard. Semper Paratus.
Awesome. So tell us, what got you into overland travel and traveling full time?
So it's kind of a funny story, Chris. So we were in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Actually, we're out in the Grand Tetons.
Ooh,
and we were
beautiful
driving,
place.
but yeah, it's gorgeous. And and my wife's a little crazy. So we had this big 40-foot diesel RV, and there's this place called Upper Teton View. Some overlanders might know about it. It's basically a Forest Service road that goes up. It's rutted, it's muddy, it's rocky. It's a shelf road. It makes 90-degree turns. And then you end up on this gorgeous plateau that facing you, the Grand Tetons are just sitting there. It's this gorgeous, gorgeous place to overland if you ever get a chance. But I drove up there in the Jeep, took a look at it and said, yeah, that's really nice, but there's no way we're getting our RV up here. And Brittany said, I got this. And believe it or not, she drove a 32,000-foot, 40-foot diesel RV up this Forest Service road and parked it on this plateau.
Oh, wow.
If that gives you
Brittany.
any idea, yeah, she's out of control. If that gives you any idea of how adventurous Brittany is, and so anyway, we were coming back and we were driving back into Jackson Hole, and all of a sudden Brittany goes, pull over, pull over, pull over. And I thought like something was wrong. I didn't know what was happening. So I pulled over and I went into this parking lot, and there's this big Unimog overlanding box truck that's sitting in this parking lot. Yeah, with the for sale sign. She jumps out of the Jeep, runs over to it, points at it. I'm still in the Jeep. I look at her and she goes, this is what I want to do. And that's how it started. So for the record, overlanding for us was Brittany's idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And unbeknownst to Eric, I had been doing some research on overlanding. And, we've been in the RV community for many years, but overlanding is still a very foreign concept. And I think to still many Americans, because it originated in Australia and I know is more popular in parts of Africa and Europe. But at least in our experience, it's more new to Americans. And so we had no idea what overlanding was. I found another podcast that interviewed the Snaith family, and they are from the United Kingdom and spent 4 years literally driving around the world with their 2 young daughters, who I want to say were 4 and 8 years old when they started. And they went to every single continent on their trip. And so I had found that episode, was totally inspired, thought if they can do that with 2 daughters, then I can do that with my 2-year-old son. And that was in May of last year. Okay. And so, we've been RVing for a long time, but our overlanding adventure started mid last year, and it's been a whirlwind ever since then.
Okay, cool. Now, do you guys spend a lot of time planning each leg of your trip, or before you went full time? And what kind of recommendations do you have for our listeners in how much planning to either do or not do?
Well, that's a good question, Chris. And the short answer is yes and no. So the yes part is that we spend a lot of time preparing, asking the right questions, doing internet research, reaching out to people who have been there recently. What we found is that the overlanding community as a whole is extremely helpful, and they're happy to talk about their adventures and their travels and give you pro tips and that type of thing. And so we do a lot of research, I guess, is a good way to go about it. As far as planning the actual route, sometimes like in our recent trip to Mexico, we had a general idea of where we were going, but we hadn't actually decided which route we were taking until right before we went there. And sometimes we would change things midstream. So, it's about staying flexible. Now, as far as the paperwork goes, you definitely want to be over-prepared rather than under-prepared. We have been very fortunate in our preparations that we are over-prepared, if you will. And so we have a manila folder, and it's all broken down and tabbed out. And, you could ask us for any document, and we've got it. We can produce it in less than 30 seconds because we know exactly where it is.
Not that we've timed it.
Right. But having said that, they didn't ask us, and we can get into this later if you like, but they didn't ask us for 95% of the things that we were told that we were going to need to have. For our Mexico trip. Having said that, had they asked us, we would have had it. And of course, if we didn't have it, they definitely would have asked us for it. And that would have caused a lot of problems. So.
That's really interesting. We did a bit of an impromptu interview yesterday And she told us the same thing. So for our listeners, make sure that you're prepared and you've got all those documents, and make sure you can do it within 30 seconds, because that seems to be the part of it.
Well, a lot of them are carrying these big guns and stuff, and they look really intimidating.
Yeah, so you want to whip it out.
Yeah, so make sure you've got all the documents. But sometimes, don't be overstressed about doing that border crossing. Sometimes it may be a lot easier than what you think it's going to be.
Yeah, that was our experience for sure.
So tell us about your current vehicles. You've got Basecamp, you got the RV, you've got your Jeep. Give us some details on both of those, if you would.
Sure. So Basecamp is a Winnebago View, a 2016 Winnebago View. It's fully decked out for solar. And we call him Basecamp because that's exactly what we intend to use him for. Park him somewhere, let's say in Moab, Utah, and take off in the Jeep 175 miles in one direction, go overlanding, enjoy what the country offers. And then when we're all ready to just have a little bit of a rest and some really nice showers, then come back to Basecamp and relax for a little bit. So that's our Basecamp. And then our overlanding vehicle is a 2014 Jeep Wrangler Rubicon Unlimited. His name is Guardian, after the 20 years in the Coast Guard. And he's a really, really cool vehicle. We've got an iCamper rooftop tent on there, a Batwing, Rhino Rack Batwing awning, Genesis Basecamp stove, and all kinds of stuff in there. We can go over that more if you like. I don't want to drag it on, but we've got a lot of little toys and goodies on our overlanding rig.
Sure. So just so there's no confusion, we had the 40-foot RV for almost 5 years, but we sold that in December for the sake of overlanding more. And we moved into the Jeep exclusively and lived out of our Jeep for 3 months. And then we went into Basecamp, which is about half the size of our previous RV.
Yeah, we weren't expecting to have an RV this year at all. Matter of fact, the original plan was to have just the Jeep for all of 2019 and go overlanding for a full year. However, some very, very dear friends of ours had the exact RV that we knew we wanted to purchase, which was the Winnebago View 24J floor model. And they are extreme boondockers. And like I said, dear friends of ours. So they had already set it up with solar and water,
upgraded batteries,
upgraded everything pretty much on the thing.
Okay.
And so as we were actually in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, and Brittany came up to me with her phone and said, "Look." And as soon as I saw it, I rushed to his page and I said, "Dibs." I said, "I'm your buyer. Take it off the market." He said, "Do you want to see it?" I said, "No, we just need to meet up," because it was the exact model we were looking for. So it turned out good.
So everything just kind of lined up perfectly for you. That's super interesting.
Yeah, it really did.
And then when you moved out of the RV and you went into the Jeep full time, how did you feel that worked when you went into Mexico? Was that too cramped? Was it a big adjustment?
I mean, overall, I think it was a good thing. You're more exposed to the elements. And so that's the biggest thing, and something that we're really keeping in mind as we're planning to launch internationally full time in about 3 years. And we're really going back and forth between the Jeep and a more self-contained vehicle, even if it's a smaller one. And one of the biggest reasons is, like I said, exposure to the elements, whether it's rain or, going up to elevation, and it's just cold up there, because in the Jeep, we really just have our rooftop tent to retreat to. And, especially as Caspian gets older and we're homeschooling him, he'll be around kindergarten age when we plan to go around the world, and he needs a place to do his schoolwork. And I'm not sure that I want that place to be a rooftop tent if it's raining or very cold outside.
For what it's worth, Chris, we also have the iCamper SkyCamp Annex, which is a big tent annex that attaches to the rooftop tent.
Oh, God.
And
Okay.
we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But I will say that there's always trade-offs. And this is something that we're learning and that we're in the process of learning along with our fellow overlanders, what fits our vibe, what fits our groove. And so one of the things, like Brittany said, we wanted to downsize. We wanted to get into a smaller RV, which is why we picked up Basecamp and got rid of the 40-foot diesel. We loved our 40-foot diesel, but it just wasn't right for our lifestyle anymore. And with the Jeep, there are trade-offs. So, you have the ability to be nimble. You have the ability to go anywhere and do anything in the Jeep. But like Brittany said, we don't have a lot of the living space. And then there's the elements and that concern. And so there's almost like a comfort of having a Unimog box truck or an adventure truck or a global expedition vehicle or an Earth Roamer or something along those lines. But then you start to think, am I going to be pulling this thing into the downtown streets of Puebla, Mexico, where we really enjoyed going and parking it there? You know, can you do that in a behemoth of a truck? And so we're trying to figure out what we really enjoy doing when we're going to different countries and exploring different places, and then trying to measure what vehicle is going to best suit our needs with all of those factors combined. So we're still figuring it out, Chris.
Got it. So that'll be super interesting to see what you guys end up doing.
Yeah, hopefully the right decision when the time comes.
Oh, it'll be great. You'll make it happen either way. So tell us about your cooking setup and any recommendations for our listeners in putting their cooking setup kitchen together. And I think the most helpful would be what you did when you went into Mexico when you just had the Jeep.
Sure. So in the back of the Jeep, we have an ARB fridge, and actually our fridge in our RV went out last July. So we picked up the ARB then, and I practiced living out of the ARB exclusively for about 6 months before we moved into the Jeep. And that was really helpful. And then beside the fridge, we have 3 drawers where it's almost exclusively kitchen utensils and kind of pantry area. And then we have a fold-down table on the back tailgate where it's stainless steel and a bamboo surface as well. And my stove is the Jetboil Genesis system.
Genesis Basecamp.
Yes, Genesis Basecamp. And it has a little Luna burner that taps into it where you can boil water or soup, whatever liquid, really quickly. And so that's kind of the gear that we have. And that Genesis Basecamp is a clamshell design. And so it's a 2-burner stove, but it folds up like a clamshell and is super compact and stores right away in our bottom drawer. And then for grilling, we just went with a cast iron grill top. And so that's kind of our setup. As far as what we cook, this is still something that we're learning. I am honestly not a big cook in general. And also Eric is on keto. And so there's a lot of foods that he doesn't eat. For example, pasta, we don't eat. And I know that can be a go-to for a lot of overlanders. So we tend to go with meats and vegetables and cheeses and eggs. And I keep it fairly simple.
But we enjoy good meals. I mean, you know, with the griddle and the grill on the other side, we can grill up steaks, pork chops, roast asparagus, and that type of thing, and hot dogs and bratwurst and, well, we don't really do hot dogs, bratwurst and burgers and those types of things. We do those all the time. So it works out well for us, and it's a nice, very, very quick and easy setup.
Got it. Cool. So what is that one thing you value the most, either on or in your vehicle as you're overlanding?
I'd honestly have to say that the number one thing we value the most is, besides the Jeep itself, has to be our rooftop tent. We did a lot of research on the rooftop tent, and having a family, even if it's just 2 people that want space, we landed on the iCamper Skycamp, and it's a Rocky Black edition. We do a lot of off-roading. The Rocky Black edition has like a rhino-lined textured finish to it, which we've already scratched up multiple times on branches and off-road trails. But it pops up and it deploys in 45 seconds. And that's astounding for anybody who's already into overlanding to know that I can go from parking my vehicle to being up in my tent fully set up in 45 seconds. That's like mind-blowing to a lot of people.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Having said that was an important concern for us, Chris, and it's something that I think if people are getting into overlanding, you want to think about setup times and breakdown times, because a lot of times you're going to need to take off or go do something, or you have to run to the grocery store, or you have to go find something, and so you have to leave. So how long is it going to take you to set up your camp? How long is it going to take you to break down your camp? Can one person do it by themselves is another question.
In case of emergency.
And, these are all things you have to think about. We've been extremely happy with the iCamper Skycamp. Can't say enough good things about it. We got it through Lee Hoffman at Altitude Industries. Having said that, there's also other things that people don't normally think about that are really important. And one of the things that comes to mind is our Blue Ridge Overland Gear extra large tire bag. It's kind of like a bag that sits on the back of the spare tire, and we use it to clean up trails as we're driving around. We see some trash, we'll put it in there, or any trash that we generate, or dirty diapers in our case.
Yes, we also have a 2-year-old, and we don't want that in the Jeep.
And I'll tell you, it's one of those items that we use constantly. And it's one of those that almost becomes an afterthought, but it's something that we use daily.
Interesting. Okay. Very good. Then anything that you originally packed in the beginning that you never used and just ended up removing from your overall setup?
Not that we actually removed. We did pack something on our last trip to Mexico that took up a lot of space and that we didn't use once. And that is like what you never want to do when you're overlanding. But what we did is we had the iCamper SkyCamp tent. And like I said, we have an annex that attaches to it. We packed the annex. We didn't use it once. And this was actually our fault. So this was
a learning experience.
It was a learning experience for us. In hindsight, we would have packed it still and taken it with us. But we had never set it up. We got it. We never tried setting it up before we went on the trip. And we had kind of made this decision amongst ourselves that, hey, if we're going to be in one place for 2 or 3 days, we'll go ahead and set it up. And then we'll use it and enjoy it for what it is. And we'll have all this extra space. What we found, though, is that we never stayed in one place for more than one night. And so we never broke it out, and we ended up just carrying this.
Right. We were under the impression that it was going to be a lot harder to set up.
Right.
And we've since used it overlanding, and it was a breeze to set up. Right. And now we would do it with a one-night stay. So the lesson is practice using your gear, know how to use it before you go.
Right.
Because if we had done that, we would have used it more.
Yeah, we actually set it up. We were sitting next to a bayou in Louisiana, like straight up in the bayou, and we're on this end cap of like a jetty. And we popped open the tent. We got there kind of early, and I told Brittany, I said, hey, do you think we should put this up? She's like, yeah, let's give it a shot.
Well, it was really cold, too.
So, and we had a little time, so we decided to try and set it up. Now, keep in mind, it was extremely windy that day, so there was the added extra challenge of setting up the annex for the first time, having never done it before in wind. And we set it up in about 10 minutes, even with the wind. So when that happened, we were like, oh, well, that was we should have been using this in Mexico. So anyway, for what it's worth, use your gear and learn how to use your gear before you go on a trip.
Yeah, smart advice. Cool. So what are your current top 2 or 3 destinations you've been to, and a little detail on what made them so special for you?
Yeah, a couple places come to mind. The first one is Leadville, Colorado, and it's special for a few reasons. It was our first overlanding weekend stay with our new rooftop tent. And so it's one of those memories that will always stay with you. But we stayed on Twin Lakes outside Leadville. And so we woke up in the morning to this beautiful vista. And then that day we went off-roading with the convoy that we were with in that area. And all the aspen had turned yellow. And it was stunningly beautiful.
It was an explosion of color.
Yes, it was so wonderful. We went over the Continental Divide on that trip. And it was just a really wonderful weekend. And then the second place that comes to mind was during our 7-week stay through the interior of Mexico. And over a weekend, we went out again with a group of locals who were also members of Overland Bound. And that's how we had found each other before we even went to Mexico. And they planned this special route for us through Sierra Gorda, which is the mountain chain, about 500 miles down from Laredo or so.
Yeah, maybe 700, but yes, somewhere around there. It's outside of Querétaro.
Yes. So we started in Bernal, which is Peña de Bernal, is one of the tallest monoliths in the world. And we started there and we just went into the mountains and we did switchbacks and we did some driving in the dark, which we do not recommend. And, we did river crossings and they had planned everything. And so we were just along for the ride, but it was scenery that we had no idea was there in the interior of Mexico.
No, it was absolutely mind-blowing, Chris. We started out at like 8,000 feet of elevation. We went down 30 and 40 degree inclines into this canyon, so dropping 8,000 feet back down to sea level. And like Brittany said, it wasn't on purpose, but there were some delays with the convoy, and we ended up going down this hill, this off-road hill in the dark. And so we were really dependent on our external lights that we used, and we made it down safely. And then when we got to the bottom, we crossed this river like 50 times, and we were the only vehicle there that didn't have a snorkel. So we felt a little underprepared, but we made it through, and they were a great group of folks, just really awesome to hang out with. The Overland Bound Mexico crew was awesome. And we just, were down there, and it was just incredible. Like, I can't even begin to tell you that if you were ever thinking about going to Mexico, most people will just go to a border town or go to the beach in Baja, but they don't think about going into the interior. The vistas there were unbelievable.
Oh, that's really cool. So I think your experience traveling as overlanders with your son Caspian would be super valuable to our listeners. What experiences and tips would you provide them in overlanding as a family?
So our experience is a little bit different because we have been traveling long before Caspian was born. And so he came home to our RV at 1 day old, and he knows nothing else apart from a life of full-time travel. And so, but we've learned lessons over that time that still apply to overlanding. And I think one of the biggest ones is that routine is still important, especially when they're younger children. So to protect the nap times and to not push meal times. And also just to set the tone for the family. So Caspian looks to Eric and I when things are getting stressful, when we have breakdowns, when we have long hours. He's looking to us to see how we're responding emotionally, and we found that he will mirror our attitude toward what we're experiencing. And so if we're stressed out and we're starting to get a little snippy at each other, Caspian starts to get fussy and upset. And if we have a sense of humor about what we're experiencing, he will be happy-go-lucky and go along with it.
Yeah, and I would add that, one of the things is to include them, especially when they're young. Include them in the process, include them in setting up. When I'm out setting up something around the Jeep or something and I've got to hammer in a guy rope or something like that, he wants to hammer in the guy rope. So I'll put him on my lap, even at his young age, put the hammer in his hand, hold it with him, and we'll hammer it in together, and just get him involved or get your child involved in the process early. He can tell you where the wet bay is on our RV. He can tell you how the water connections work. He can tell you, things about our Jeep and how it works and where the tent is and those types of things. And he will. If you were hanging out with us, he'll give you a tour by himself.
Awesome.
But that's because he's actively involved, and it's not just like stick them in a playpen while you're getting set up. It's get them involved in the process, get them involved in the lifestyle, and have them involved in the things that you're already doing. So like Brittany and I do a lot of hiking. One of our goals is to have Caspian hike with us at least a mile for every year that he's alive, every year that he gets older, whatever. So in his first year, before he turned 2, he hiked a mile by himself. Mm-hmm. When I say by himself, we did not aid him. Obviously, we were with him, but we did not aid him in the hike. This year, our hope and our goal is that he'll be able to do 2 miles by himself before he turns 3. And so setting those kind of goals and getting excited about it.
Sure. And Chris, if you don't mind, I will add one more thing, which is not to buy into the materialism that is present in our culture about what your children need as far as, objects and items and baby gear and this and that. Obviously, we have to be minimalist. We did even in our 40-foot RV when he was a newborn, and we still do now in our Jeep when he's 2. And he just needs very little. We need very little. And so just really being honest with yourself about what you need for what you're trying to accomplish. And as a mom, this can be hard because all my mom friends have all these fancy gadgets, and I want to do right by my child, and, that whole struggle that you can go through. And we've just learned how little we need. And most of all, we've come to value our time together as a family and being with our son every single day through full-time travel.
And he learns concepts about sharing, which I've found very interesting about his reactions and the way he does things. Like sometimes when we were in Mexico, we might buy him a little toy so that he would have something new to play with. Nothing super expensive, but just something new. And then he'd play with it. But then at the end of the day, we'd have him give it to somebody else. So you talk about philanthropy. So we'd find a child, that was there with his parents or something, and he would share it, and he would call it sharing. And he would go over and he would take that toy and he would give it to the child, and the child would be ecstatic. The parent would be thankful, and Caspian got to play with something for a couple days before we gave it away, and then we'd go to our next destination, maybe repeat that process.
Okay, that's really good. I like that. So what's a favorite meal or recipe you enjoy while traveling? We talked about meals a little bit, but anything specific that's kind of a go-to?
Again, Chris, I'm kind of laughable when it comes to this. Eric does no cooking. And so mostly we grill. I mean, honestly, we mostly grill. I don't do fancy recipes. So I wish I had more to offer, but it's kind of just one of my personal weaknesses.
I will say that Brittany does make a tilapia that's really good. That's one of my favorite meals.
Sure, but unfortunately you can't get tilapia everywhere you go.
That's awesome. How do you guys generally do your laundry on the road?
So
we don't. We've been wearing the same clothes for 4 months.
Oh, come on.
Check. Okay, very good.
No.
Next question.
So when we were in Mexico, we would go to the lavanderias, and in Mexico, and I assume in many countries, a lot of people don't own their own washers and dryers. And so it's fairly easy to find, lavanderias or places to do your laundry. And we would go about once a week and find one wherever we were. Now, what we learned is that you have to be a little loose with things like hours of operation.
Yeah, those are just suggestions in Mexico.
Yes, hours of operations are just suggestions. There was a place in San Luis Potosí in Mexico where we felt that they were holding our clothes hostage because it took us a couple days to track them down and,
a couple days.
Get our clothes. Yeah, a couple days. And, we would call and no one would ever answer the phone. It was about a 15-minute walk. And so we would walk over there.
And then we'd stand outside for like a half an hour.
And we would meet the people who were also waiting for their clothes. And so, in other cultures, time is not treated the same way, which is honestly very refreshing in a lot of ways. And so what I ended up doing is I would go to do laundry about a day earlier, and I would just expect that it would take me an extra day to get my clothing back.
Oh, smart. Okay. Now, with your proper pronunciation, I'm guessing that both of you speak Spanish?
No, Brittany took a little Spanish in school, right?
Yeah, I can understand.
She understands it well, so I can't speak it around her without her understanding, but she gets it. And I actually speak fluent Spanish, so that was very helpful for our trip in Mexico, Chris.
And that was going to be the question. What are your thoughts on being able to speak the local language when you went into Mexico? Was that super important that you were able to communicate fluently in Spanish?
I wouldn't say it's super important because I don't want to discourage anyone who doesn't speak the language from going. There are a lot of apps, for example, Google Translate, that you can use to get by and get through what you need to get through. There's also learning apps like Duolingo, which are great for learning a language, at least the basics enough to travel. And I don't ever want it to be a hindrance to someone, because if it is, Brittany and I are only going to Spanish-speaking countries, and that's not going to happen. We plan to travel the world. So, but as far as being helpful, it was extremely helpful to be able to speak the language. However, I didn't usually speak the language when we were there. Like I said, I can speak it, read it, write it, and understand it fluently. I didn't really let people in on that. So I did a lot of listening when we were there. And sometimes it's to your advantage, especially at border crossing, at military checkpoints, to speak in your native tongue of English, but being able to understand what they're telling you.
Okay, very good. So during your trip to Mexico, specifically with our question on hygiene, did you have a shower and toilet set up? Or what is your recommendations to our listeners for keeping it simple and hygienic on the road?
Yeah, so a few thoughts here. First of all, we did not take a shower and toilet setup to Mexico. We have done a lot of research. We definitely would like to add both eventually if we can find room for them. But, for toilet needs, we had a shovel and biodegradable toilet paper, and we were staying out in the middle of nowhere, so that worked perfectly fine. One thing, though, that I did learn very early on when we first started overlanding is that routine is very important. And for myself as a new overlander, I at first felt that it was more like camping, where you kind of let things slide a little bit. It's cold, you're going to bed in the dark, and you're like, oh, I don't want to brush my teeth tonight. I just want to go to bed. And, it was just that first trip that I realized if overlanding is going to be sustainable, then I need to take my routine very seriously. I need to change my clothes and not wear the same clothes for 3 days. And the same goes for Caspian. I need to brush my teeth every day and just realize that those hygienic routines are very important in order to make overlanding something that you can do long term.
That's really good input. So tell us about the number one challenge you've had to overcome while you're on the road.
Yeah, I think for myself, the challenge has been wanting to overland the way that other people might think that I should overland. I am a people pleaser, and when I think of overlanding, it seems a little bit more hardcore to me. You're taking your 4x4 vehicle, you're going out into the middle of nowhere, you're not relying on anybody, you're taking everything that you need. And, to me, that's looks like. But we had to do things a little bit differently as we first started overlanding because we still work full time and our work is reliant on the internet. And so as we went into Mexico for 7 weeks, we had to accept that internet connectivity was a must for us. We couldn't take 7 weeks off work. We couldn't even take 1 weekday off of work. And so what that looked like for us was mixing up our, going out into the middle of nowhere, into the mountains with some Airbnb stays in the middle of towns so that we could have reliable Wi-Fi and keep our commitments to our clients, because ultimately, at least where we are right now, that's how we keep the wheels turning. And for me, that was a true challenge because I didn't feel that I was doing it right. I felt like I was being a wuss or whatever. Sure. And so, but we're moving towards our dreams, and we're not letting the stage that we are right now with our work and our income keep us from getting started. Ultimately, we're moving towards a lifestyle that doesn't require internet connectivity every day of the week. And we're giving ourselves about 3 years to make that happen so that we can launch internationally. In the meantime, we have this awesome setup and we can go out into the middle of nowhere and we don't have to rely on anybody with the setup that we have right now. But we still have the jobs that we have that keep us a little bit tethered in a way that we hope to cut that tether here in the near future.
Right. And we're being very intentional about that, Chris. And that's something else that I want to pass on to the listeners is, you got to make a plan. You've got to look forward to what are your dreams, what are your goals, and make the plan and then take the steps to execute that plan. So we're already living this life right now. And yet we're looking 3 years ahead to where we want to be and what we want to do and trying to figure out, okay, what are the steps that we need to take to make that dream a reality, and realizing that it's going to take months, years to make that happen, but we're actively doing it now so that when we get to that place, we don't ever have to be tethered to the internet again. We can just take off and go and make enough passive income, for example, to be able to sustain this lifestyle and travel the world. So that's the goal. That's what we're shooting for.
Super smart to be planning ahead and to be thinking about what's going to work for you and to be able to match those things with the style of overlanding or travel that works for you and that you want to do.
One of the things I wanted to add, Chris, you had asked a question about the biggest challenge that we'd overcome on the road, and Brittany went in a completely different direction. I loved her answer, but the first thing that went through my head was this fuel shortage that we ran into in Mexico. So yeah, it was crazy. So we drove into Mexico. We're good to go. We're all excited, and all of a sudden, my friends start sending us messages about, "Have you heard about this fuel shortage that just happened?" And it literally happened like the day after we arrived in Mexico. Pipelines were shut down and lines were backed up. It was like the 70s in the United States when you had these long lines at a few gas stations that happen to have fuel. And when you're completely dependent upon fuel for your travel, that got a little scary. But you overcome, you improvise, adapt, and overcome, as we say in the military. You find a way to get through it, get around it. And we were able to do that. But you just never know what you're going to face. And so it's one of those things with full-time travel or overlanding. You have to remain flexible. You have to be able to change your schedule or change your direction or stop more frequently or be prepared to stay in long lines or whatever you have to do to make the lifestyle work.
Yeah, really good points. How did you make sure that everybody in the group got gas, and did you just travel less or slower? What was your game plan?
So, like Brittany said, originally we had planned on doing a few other side trips, I should say. And, we extended our stay at one of the Airbnbs where we were at in San Luis Potosí a little bit longer than we would have. I wanted to leave earlier than we did, but we ended up staying for 2 weeks, hoping that some of this would start to resolve itself. But we also prepared. And I think that that's something that everybody can do, right? Because you want to be as prepared as possible for the journey that you're going on. And so, like many overlanders, we carry an external fuel tank. I think the industry standard tends to be the red Rotopacks that everybody attaches to their vehicle, and those hold usually about 2.25 gallons each, and most people have 2 of them, so they'll have like 4.5 gallons of extra fuel that they can put back into their vehicle. We actually ran across a product, and I don't get paid to say this. I'm not on there. I'm not sponsored by them at all. But we ran across a product by Titan Fuel Tanks called the Trail Trucker 2 that actually holds 12 gallons of fuel in one container. And it's a huge difference. It's game-changing level difference. It's grounded to the vehicle. It's permanently mounted on the vehicle, and it's grounded, so you don't have to take it on and off the vehicle to fill up your fuel tank. And it has a shaker siphon gravity-fed hose that actually transfers 2 gallons of fuel per minute. So my Jeep holds, my Jeep holds 22.5 gallons, and the fuel tank holds 12. So if I'm empty, I can actually fill up over half a tank of fuel from my one container in 6 minutes in the middle of nowhere. That's impressive stuff.
And it even mounts behind our spare tire, which is space that we wouldn't be using for anything else.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, cool. So on border crossings, when you guys went into Mexico and then coming back into the States, any tips or recommendations for our listeners there more than what we talked about briefly previously?
Absolutely. So originally we were planning to cross in Brownsville because it was the closest to where we were. But we talked to a number of people, both our Mexican friends and overlanders who had been into Mexico, and they recommended that we cross in Laredo for security reasons. And more than that, there's actually a crossing 45 minutes outside Laredo called the Columbia Bridge. And that was recommended because it is not as highly trafficked. And so it can be a little bit more of a peaceful crossing, not have to stand such long lines. And we hit that first thing in the morning. I think there were 2 people in front of us in the queue. It was so well set up as far as going through the steps of getting your visa, getting your photocopies, getting the tip pass for our vehicle. We just went right through it and breezed on through. And then we got back into the Jeep, and that's where they do the vehicle inspection. And we were seeing people basically emptying everything out of their vehicles. And we were like, dear. Oh no, here we go.
Yeah, we thought,
we thought we were in for it. But a lady walked over. She wasn't in a uniform. I think she had a badge with her name on it. And she said, "What's that on your roof?" And Eric said, It's a
rooftop tent.
It's a rooftop tent. And I think she asked, "Where are you going?"
We said Monterey.
And she said, "Adelante."
And that was
Go ahead.
and we passed on through.
And honestly, the return trip was also very easy. We decided to go back to Colombia, even though it was out of our way. And the lines were a little bit longer. It was midday, but I think we counted 12 people in front of us. And that was at the U.S. checkpoint. And so going through the Mexican checkpoint where we had to return our vehicle pass in order to get our deposit back and be allowed to enter Mexico again. That part was extremely simple. And then we just got in line for the U.S. checkpoint and went on through.
Now, the best tip that I think that comes from what we learned on this, and that is don't necessarily rely on, we write a blog, but don't necessarily rely on a blog or a website because you don't know how old that information is. It's good to do your research on websites and talk to the bloggers who wrote the article, reach out to them. They're usually very helpful about answering questions, but do your homework and find out who just came back, who was just there, like within the past few months, and reach out to those people because things at borders change so frequently. And most people are relying on books that were written, 10 years ago, or they're going to a website and reading an article that was written 4 years ago. And that information just isn't current anymore. And so if you talk to somebody who just crossed and pick their brain, you're going to have the best information possible. And that's something that was really helpful to us.
Yeah, really good tips. Cool. Any specific safety planning you do or tips you can provide our listeners on safety and security?
Yes. So one of the things that was really critical to us, especially with a toddler and just being overprotective and my military background, I wanted to make sure that we were as safe as possible. I wasn't really worried so much about our equipment or the Jeep even. I was mostly worried about making sure that my wife and my son and I were all going to get in safe and get out safe. And so one of the things that we purchased, or I should say my mother purchased for us, thanks Mom, was the Garmin InReach Explorer Plus. Okay. And that is a satellite texting device for those that don't know what it is. Basically, it allows you to communicate via text with anyone in the world from any location in the world as long as you have a clear view of the sky. The device isn't cheap. I want to say it's around $450. And then there's a monthly subscription that varies between $25 a month and I believe $100 a month. But you can turn it on and off. So we got the device and we turned it on for our time that we were going to be in Mexico. And I told Brittany, I said, listen, if for whatever reason, not that this would happen, and I'm not trying to scare anybody, but if for some reason we got carjacked or there was some sort of emergency where we had to leave the Jeep, the goal was to get Caspian, our son, her, and I out of the vehicle with that one device. I didn't care about anything else in the Jeep. Because if we could get that device and get out of there, we could communicate and request rescue or request assistance or let people know where we were. And so I told Brittany, if you see some sort of danger, shove that thing down your pants if I don't get to it first. That's literally what I told her.
It's literally what he told me.
So that's a very, very important device. And then other than that, we did some general safety and security precautions. We put wheel locks on the wheels. We don't have expensive rims, but we put on the latest and greatest wheel locks on there.
Yeah, we wanted to keep our tires and wheels.
We wanted to keep our tires on the vehicle.
Important.
They're kind of important. And so that was important. We also added a Viper security alarm system to the vehicle that communicated with us about up to a mile away from wherever we parked the vehicle. So that was important. And as far as carrying money goes, we split up our money. So Brittany had some money. I had some money. We had money in like 5 different locations in the vehicle, on our persons, in our bags, but we didn't all have it in one location. So that was important too. So that way, if anything happened at any point in time to us, we always had somewhere else to go to grab another cachet of funds if an emergency were to have taken place. And then on my person, I actually had a fake wallet in case we got into trouble, we got mugged.
That was the only wallet that you used, really.
Right. And I kept a fake wallet, and then I had my real wallet, which was in a different location, and I had less money in there, and I would transfer money from the places that we had it into my fake wallet, and I would only carry that wallet on me. But somewhere else on my person, I would usually have 2 very large bills, the equivalent of very large bills in Mexico, hidden on my person in case it was an emergency.
How did those Sierra Gorda Mountains sound in Mexico?
Heavenly.
And I know I didn't pronounce that perfectly. but that's as close as I'm going to get.
That works for me. I picture it very beautiful, luscious. So Chris, just get me to Mexico.
You just think Mexico. You care less about the mountains.
Well, I'll take both, beach and mountains.
All right. Well, we got to go through the mountains before we get to the beach. There's no shortcuts. We have to go through the interior. We cannot start at the beach.
Okay. Deal.
Deal?
Deal.
Boom. Let's go.
So I like Brittany's points of importance of having and keeping routines, because I am a routine kind of girl.
Boy, are you.
And although we won't have children with us when we start traveling, I think their points of traveling with the child will be very well received.
But we do love our children.
Absolutely. But so looking forward to the early sunrise, cup of coffee.
It's silence. Will you promise not to ask questions?
Oh boy. That's a whole nother podcast.
How to get your wife to stop asking questions. We would love some feedback. Just kidding. So, hey, keep in mind, if you're going to be at the Overland Expo West in Flagstaff, Arizona, here pretty shortly, May 17th through the 19th, 2019, in case you're listening to this in 2022. In any case, be sure to join Eric and Brittany's session titled Overlanding While Working Full-Time. Is it possible? They'll also be featured on 2 other panels. One, regional questions and answers for Mexico and Central America, and the other, Overlanding with Kids Roundtable.
Perfect.
I bet those are going to be really good.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be there, be sure and go up and introduce yourself to Eric and Brittany, a fun couple to talk to, and be sure and tell them we said hi.
Hi. Our interview with the Jeepsies is our longer format interview, so we split these into 2 episodes for your downloading pleasure. Don't worry. New episodes are released each Thursday.
The Jeepsies.
The Jeepsies.
Isn't that like just the coolest name?
Yeah.
Like a play on the word of gypsies? Jeepsies?
Yep. And we'd fit right in because we've got a Jeep too.
I just thought it was just a unique, really great name. In any case, in next week's episode, we learn more about the finer details of Eric and Brittany's overlanding setup, discuss financing, some great information that they share with us on that episode, and enjoy more road stories from their travels, learning valuable tips and ideas.
Remember, it's a good idea to visit the show notes page on our website at ghteoverland.com/podcasts. Select the Jeepsies episode. All the details and helpful links are already there for you.
Yep, and be sure to send your questions, suggestions, and feedback to ghteoverlandpodcast@gmail.com. And we'd love it if you'd connect with us on the social medias at ghteoverland. Be sure and share this episode with your friends who enjoy travel off the beaten path.
If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to us if you did 2 things to help out. Rate and review the podcast, that's 1.
Number 2,
Subscribe. Giving the GHT Overland podcast a little extra love on your podcast platform of choice. Thank you, and we will see you next Thursday for part 2 of the GHT Overland podcast with the Jeepsies. Bye.